Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to our Inspirability Talks, brought to you from my office in Kent, but of course delivered to you by Aerobility, the disabled flying charity. We have been off the airwaves for a couple of months. It's been busy times, isn't it? COVID. I think if you listen to the media and you just sense the general views and opinions of people, we're seeing the back of COVID. It seems to be under control, but who am I? I'm not a government spokesman. I'm seeing what's out there. I've been doing lots of flying. I hope you have as well. But we are getting into those months of the year now where the nights are closing in and we're just pining to get up in the air. But fear not, you can talk about and see flying stories from our Inspirability sessions. And this evening, we are really lucky and privileged to have someone who has been on the UK display circuit for decades. His name will be familiar to you. You will most certainly have seen him flying if you've ever attended an air show in the last 30 odd years. I'll check exactly how many of those years he's been flying in the UK. But before I introduce our guest, just to let you know that you can like, comment and share, and you can also submit your questions this evening by going into the comment section and sharing those questions. I promised you I'll read them all out and we'll get an answer to you. You can download these Inspirability Talks off Apple Music and Spotify. So these are available in perpetuity, so you can listen to them in your car or on a long cross-country trip somewhere. So we'll let you know how you can access those through the Aerobility website. So look, without further ado, I don't want to waste any more time because we have a lot to get through this evening. Through my days of attending air shows and being an aviation enthusiast, have always wanted to pick the brains of our guest this evening. And yes, our guest is Nigel Lamb. You may have seen us put this forward to you in social media, so I hope you're tuning in and bringing your questions to bear. But let me give you Nigel's background. I'm going to embarrass him. He's going to see his life pass before him in the next few minutes, but I don't want to miss a fact. Now, Nigel is actually a friend of Aerobility. He knows us very well and has supported our endeavours, and some of you may have met and spoken to Nigel about his flying exploits. But he is best known for display flying, as I say. He was born in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and began flying in the Rhodesian Air Force on piston-engined aircraft. He became an instructor, but would you believe through the Vampire operationally in conflict, and also the Alouette 2 and Alouette 3. And I was speaking to Nigel a few days ago, and he said his world, his environment is low level. So no wonder he found his home at low level, going upside down. And I really look forward to finding out about the world of low level aerobatics and display flying. In 1981, Nigel moved to the UK to become a professional air display pilot to follow his dream. And he joined the Marlborough aerobatic team, flying the Pitts S2A. So those of you who were around in the 80s, I'm sure will remember that with much fondness. And Nigel became a partner in that business with his wife, Hilary, also an accomplished pilot. And in 1987, they actually bought the business or the operating company. And then that was their journey into aviation full time, bringing aviation to our local airfields on the display circuit. Nigel's travelled across Europe and the Far East, set up Team Toyota Aerobatics. I remember that very well in the late 1980s. But you know that precursor, that foundation was built upon Nigel's passion for aerobatics. And if I told you that Nigel holds the UK was the British Unlimited Aerobatic champion 8 times in succession. He holds that record still. He represented Great Britain in the World Aerobatic Championships, the European Aerobatic Championships, and he won the British Unlimited Freestyle Championships 4 times. So a really accomplished aerobatics pilot, and he has indeed been a mentor to many people in this country and around the world in terms of flying aerobatics. In 1993, he joined the old Fly Machine Company at Duxford, of course, an organisation that was created by the late, great Ray Hanna and his son, Mark. And Nigel flew those aircraft in the collection, and I'm sure some of you will have seen the wonderful displays put on in MH434, and of course the Breitling Fighters, which was just absolutely spellbinding. Nigel spent 18 years associated with Breitling, and he flew, as I said, in the Breitling Fighters display team. He flew in the Breitling Angels display team, and also represented Breitling in the Red Bull series, the air racing series, of which he won in 2014. So an accomplished pilot, a man with 10,000 hours, 1,900 air displays in 30 countries under his belt. And no wonder he decided to retire a few years ago. And I'll be interested to see what he does for his kicks nowadays as he's retired. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Nigel onto the screen. And Nigel, are you there?
Good evening, John. Thank you for those kind words. And it's lovely to be back involved again.
No, it's good to see you too, Nigel. And as I said, you know, I'm afraid, you know, with a reputation like that, most people with aviation in their blood know who you are, but maybe don't know the story, you know, and what motivates you, and what else you've done beyond our shores in the UK. But anyway, beyond us getting to the starting point of your flying career, what have you been up to over lockdown, and how have you been scratching the aviation itch?
That's an interesting one. Well, the first lockdown came with splendid weather at a time when I'm very happily retired, I have to say. I fly as much as I can. But the first lockdown with this tremendous weather enabled my wife and I, Hilary and I, to do a lot of work on converting one of our fields into a sort of like an agroforest. So we spent a lot of time outdoors planting trees, and it's actually very rewarding. So we were busy, not bored at all, and very fortunate actually. But of course, always missed the flying.
Yeah, quite. I know, and we seem to be, you know, almost back to normal, don't we? But look, you know, we talk about these inspirability talks, and Nigel, I'm sure there's many a boy and a girl in this country who've you know, been inspired by what you've done in aviation. But who inspired you? Tell us a little bit about the beginning for your journey in aviation.
I think my beginning in aviation combines first and foremost my father, and secondly, I would think a very small incident which could happen in anyone's life, which really triggers something, and an interest and a desire to really want to do something. So first of all, my father was born in Newcastle, and he turned 18 just a month before the Poland was invaded. So he signed up and became a fighter pilot in the RAF, flying Hurricanes, Spitfires, and finishing off Mustang 3s operationally. Got shot down at just before the Bridge Too Far Battle for Arnhem in a P-51 on the Vaal River near Nijmegen, and managed to escape with the help of the Dutch resistance. Got back, his squadron had gone, and he basically wangled his way, rather than stay as a squadron leader on a desk job. He managed to wangle a position as a flight lieutenant, test flying Spitfires at Castle Bromwich under Alex Henshaw. So he spent that period from October 44 to July 45 as a production Spitfire test pilot at Castle Bromwich, and then he ended up going to Africa to farm. And I was born probably and brought up in the mountains of eastern Rhodesia, on the borders of Portuguese East Africa, which is now Mozambique, as far as you can imagine from any airfield. So didn't see airplanes, anything like that. But our house, which had no electricity, no television, a battery operated radio, but thousands and thousands of books. So I read all of those: Fly for Your Life, Reach for the Sky, all of that stuff. And that really kindled an interest. And then when I was about 8, at the local primary school, literally 3 miles away, Air Force helicopter Alouette 3 landed on the soccer field, and the pilot allowed me to put his sweaty bone dome on, which was very smelly, but it was nevertheless very, very exciting. And I think that really got me thinking about joining the Air Force.
What a story! What a story! Yeah, You're right, though, aren't you? You know, it's just those little moments of, particularly when you're young, perhaps reading books. It's your imagination, isn't it? You know, there's something that sparked me off as well. Biggin Hill is very close to where I live, and I read a lot as well. But I had the benefit of having an airfield near me. But it's really nice to hear that story. And of course, the Alouette 3 became something very familiar. So how did you take that journey into the Air Force?
It did. Well, you know, interestingly, you know, if I can inspire anybody who's lacking in confidence, I can tell you to really consider a career in aviation. You know, just go for it, because I was the most underconfident young kid, and I wasn't bad in the classroom. You know, I wasn't fantastic at sport, and I saw, as I journeyed through my high school years, again a boarding school in a town about 70 miles away, I dreamt and I wanted to fly, and I wrote to the Air Force when I was 11, but I never ever believed it was going to be a reality because I was massively underconfident. And then somehow I managed to get a place on the selection board, and actually I think it was my interview which swayed things in my favor, because I think that somehow those wonderful Air Force officers who interviewed me must have seen that there was a proper spark of desire to learn to fly. And so, yeah, I got in, and that was, for me, my salvation, really.
Mm. And you know, a lot of us won't be familiar with how the Rhodesian Air Force looked, what occupied its attention operationally in those days. I mean, what was that period of training like? What did you train on? And I was fascinated I read an old article, Nigel, on your Air Force career about flying the Vampire operationally. I mean, that sounds like an entire interview in itself.
Well, to be honest, I didn't actually fly the Vampire operationally. What I did was, you got to bear in mind, our Air Force was very much modeled on the RAF. So where I learned to fly was Rhodesian Air Force training base Thornhill. And Thornhill was a huge Empire training base during the Second World War, with mostly Harvards, I think. So all our paperwork, authorization sheets, all of that stuff was all RAF modeled. So it was almost a carbon copy. And I learned on the Piston Provost, which of course at one time was an RAF trainer. And then the next step was advanced flying on the Vampire. But our Vampires were being used in the conflict, because there was a Bush War going on, which went from 1965 to 1980. And so we, in secret, the Air Force the government did some kind of deal with South African Air Force, and we were the first course in 1976 to be sent to South Africa in South African uniforms and everything, and training under the umbrella with our own instructors, but all as South African uniformed secret mission, students and instructors in Cape Town. So I did that on the Aeromaki MB326, which was a very nice aeroplane to fly. And then came back, we commissioned, got our wings, and then I was one of the guys, 5 from my course of 15, who did the operational course, the operational OCU weapons course on the Vampire. So we flew the T-11 two-seater and the FB9.
Right. And so sort of a bit of Air America stuff going on there back in the day.
Yeah, I guess it was very exciting times.
Yeah. So obviously you've established yourself in the Air Force. It's your grounding. It's your pathway into a career, or so you thought. I mean, what was did you have a plan in terms of your career in the Air Force? Because I don't think you stayed there particularly long.
Well, I signed a 10-year contract, and after 6 years, actually after just over 5 years, there was a change of government. And of course, those who are interested in the politics of Africa, Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe got into power, and we were allowed to leave with 3 months' notice. And I stayed for a while. By then I'd done a fairly long operational tour, flying Alouette 3s and Hueys in the bush operations from 77 through to towards the end of 79, and then I was a fixed wing instructor on the SF-260 Siamaketi, so the election went to Mugabe. we were allowed to leave, and I could see a very short-term future in the Air Force. But I don't know if you've ever remember Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the book.
Yes. Yeah.
Richard Bach. Richard
Yeah.
Bach wrote a book called A Gift of Wings. I don't know if anyone's read it, but I read it sometime halfway through my Air Force, my time in the Air Force, and it completely fascinated me. This whole idea of barnstorming, open cockpit, wind in the wires, no radio, landing in paddocks, the whole thing of barnstorming and what was done between the wars. It just fascinated me, and I was desperate to do that. And so I applied for a job. I saw an old advertisement in Flight Magazine for out of date, 1 year old. So I wrote to Philip Meeson in England. And it's a long process, long story. I won't bore you with, but I managed to convince him by turning up in London 3 days after he told me I was too young and too inexperienced, and I kind of forced an interview, and then he took me flying in a pit special, and that was it.
Amazing story. So, almost having to make a pretty rapid decision in terms of your future. I mean, leaving the country you were born in, and had a career of sorts, albeit something that was politically changing out of your control, and then going straight into another country to go into full-time display flying. Was that ever something that had been a consideration or not?
No, it was a huge shift. I knew I had to leave, and whether I left, I knew that I was told before I made the decision. I said, before you make your decision, the Air Force did. I had great people, great boss, amazing guy, Steve Baldwin, and he said, this is your pathway for the next 5 years, and it was amazing. I was going to do all the things I dreamt of doing apart from what I'd already done. Flying hunters, jet weapons instructor, blah, blah, blah. And maybe going to UK to be part of the ferrying the Hawks back to Zimbabwe, the British Aerospace Space Hawks. But I knew that I really, really had to leave. And when I left, it was very, very difficult. I was definitely a fish out of water. And coming over to the UK was really, really tough. I mean, I would say that psychologically, I mean, I loved the flying. I loved the pit special, hated the weather, many things I didn't like, trained hard, fell out of more loops. I can tell you there's no one on planet Earth to this day who has fallen out of more formation loops than I did, because I never got any instruction. It was just like, follow me. And I had, so it was just, I fell out of a lot of loops.
Yeah.
But the key, of course, was always to get back in. Hopefully, I didn't fall out of any in the displays, but we did a lot of practice. So, yeah, I mean, it was hard work, very, very hard work. The country was difficult, very, very difficult. But the flying was worth it.
Well, clearly, it was a passion. It was in your heart. You followed. You were very single-minded, and to go straight into that type of flying, on the stage, so to speak, demanded a certain level of competence. We've just been discussing that, and we'll come on to that later about the regulatory requirements of display flying. But you talk about the training element of flying displays. How did you match up and weigh up the commercial side of things with the operational side? I mean, at the time you joined the Marlborough team, you were a wingman, but eventually, you became a part of the business. Tell us a little bit about back in those days, what it was like to essentially run a business on the UK display circuit. I mean, how did it work?
Well, first and foremost, I must say a big thank you to Philip Meeson. Now, very heavily involved with Jet2. He's in the Pitts S1S in the front there, and I'm one of the wingmen along with Phil Simmons. He taught me a lot about business, and I think one of the very, very early lessons was that this is not the Red Arrows. You can't do as much training as they can do, because there is that commercial element. So there are times where you're going to have to compromise, never on safety, of course, but for example on choreography. Perhaps you may have a desire to do something pretty tricky and clever and whatever, and well, maybe that's got to wait. You practice that between shows and put it into the display when you've proved it, late in the season. But you can't go out and just keep practicing. So I learned some very, very valuable lessons. And then with Philip's help, I was steered into managing the team in a way. Then I became a partner in the business, started doing competition aerobatics, and then Phillips was growing his airline business and wanted to sell the company or stop. He wanted me to stop as well and go and be part of his business. And I wanted to carry on because the flame was still very strong with me. And I just wanted to be in that display cockpit, flying exciting airplanes, high performance airplanes. And it was a big deal making a decision. Went to Africa on a 6-week holiday in the winter of 1986 and made the decision that I actually wanted to buy the business from Philip, and so I managed to persuade him to do that. And it was as it turned out, it was tough. When you've got starting to build your assets and you've got no sponsor and you're trying to tramp in the streets of London with your presentations, trying to find a sponsor, and sometimes asking people, don't send me a Christmas card, just send me a packet of crisps. That kind of stuff was the early days was very, very hard, but all worthwhile in the end.
I don't think I recall any other teams, should we say, with a corporate backer like Marlborough of the time. I mean, it definitely felt like you were trailblazing what a lot of people are doing now. I think of the Blades, the Yakovlevs, the Trig team, the Team Martini, they came in the 90s. These were civilian display teams whose existence relied upon sponsors. Obviously, the sponsors get a kickback. Tell us about, just stepping away from the operational side again, just a second. I mean, how did you manage that corporate side? What were your demands? What were the demands of you, should I say, to satisfy their part of the deal?
Well, it's a great question, actually, and it's a very, very good one. And of course, those days were very different from now. But first, I must just say, the Rothmans team was big. And very much abroad, and then back in the UK quite a bit in the late 80s. I missed that. I never saw them. I saw a couple of the guys, the Vixen pair. I bumped into them quite a lot in the early 80s. But I mean, it's a three-way thing, and we used to have to work really hard on organizers, some of the bigger air show organizers, to try and persuade them that we got Marlborough on the airplane, or Toyota. Sure, but actually we can't come for free, because the deal we've done has to have legs. It's got to have longevity. So if you go along and you try and raise sponsorship funds which run the entire running cost of your team, include the total cost, it's going to be a huge sum. So somehow, if you can spread the cost a bit, the event organizer, and convince them that what they're going to do is they're going to get a quality product because there's more training, more background, and big in the media department. I mean, our office, the admin, the backup in terms of media and press releases and generating media coverage, newspapers, television, if you could, was and regional newspapers was a huge element, and very, very important for the sponsors. So it's a three-way thing, and we flew. In those days, we were flying up to 120, 130 displays every summer in 5 months. Very often 5 in a day. You might start the day with a big air show and then do a county fair, an agricultural show, and finish off late evening with somebody's wedding. I mean, from huge crowds to small, we were for sale. We would do a display for anybody as long as you could get the clearance to do the display where it was. And we flew, although we had 3 airplanes, the 3 were at the bigger shows. Then we did a lot of duos, and we also did a lot of solos. So it was a fantastic, unbelievable learning ground for me, both in terms of operating display airplanes, but also the business side of it as well.
Yeah, and then there was Team Toyota that came after that. How did that transition occur? And again, tell us a bit about the background to that team and who flew with you.
Well, that's quite an interesting one, because Toyota were very involved with Brian Lacombe, who is a very, very much an associate of ours, a competitor, a business competitor. When I was doing competition aerobatics, he didn't used to like doing too much, program 1, 2, and 3. He wanted to do the freestyle a lot. But Brian was very much around and very big force in air displays in the UK, and he had various sponsors. One of them was Toyota, and we were told by Marlboro in about 87 that 88 would be our last year because of cigarette advertising on television, all that kind of stuff. So we started looking hard for the whole year, and we never ever approached Toyota because they had just come out of air display flying. And to our astonishment, they got hold of us. And what they wanted was more the formation element, which Brian wasn't into at that time. He was more of a solo guy. And so we had this amazing circumstance where, you've tried so hard and you've done so many presentations where you are writing hundreds of letters to different companies, researching, going to the library, no internet. So you're going to the library, you're searching magazines, you're onto Marketing Week, Campaign, all these magazines to try and find what company's marketing strategy was, and find if you could find somebody who's got the same synergy, where you could persuade them that a great vehicle for their brand name would be on the wings of your airplanes. Yeah. And it was tough. And then out of the blue comes a phone call saying, "Can you come and give us a presentation?" It was Toyota. So that led to 3 years, and then eventually to 5 years. And amazing times. And it's the same old thing. It's like you don't, in the corridor of life, you don't know which doors are going to be ajar for you to have a look behind. You've got to make plans. You've got to try hard, and you've got to always keep your mind open to opportunities and what can be done and how to persuade people. So you have to have the power of persuasion to tell them. And of course, all of these commercial backers, they wanted their bang for their buck. So whatever they spent, they wanted 2-3 times more than that in advertising a profile. So you had to prove that in every year. So it was hard work, but very very good fun.
Yeah. Now, most likely living out of a suitcase a lot of the time at the weekends. Give us a flavour. I mean, look, I've just got some just wonderful memories growing up, going to air shows around the UK, seeing the Marlboro team and Team Toyota and others. What was it like, in the pilot's tent? What was it like in the hotel? This fraternity, this camaraderie of a small community that I'm sure look out for each other. Bit of competitiveness there, perhaps commercially, and also, from a piloting perspective, maybe. But what was it like just being on the road and just give us an awareness of what it was like, behind the stage?
It was absolutely fantastic. It was a core of there weren't that many civilian full timers. There was Brian Lacomba and his guys. There was Vic Norman with his wing walking lot, and then there were lots of other people, Richard Good, and people who did, they were business people. They had a job, and then at the weekends, their passion, their hobby was bringing in money for their flying by doing some air shows. So we would bump into them all over the place. And of course, in those days, there were so many air shows. We would probably do 35 air displays at air shows in a season. We'd go to 35. And then the rest, the other sort of 80 or 90 would be the county shows and stuff. And at all those big ones.
That's an incredible number. I mean, it's amazing. That's a huge amount, isn't it?
We do. I think I might have done 12 or 14 one bank holiday weekend, different venues, 5 in a day. It was pretty common. If we didn't have a summer without one day with 5, certainly many with 4, lots with 3. And if you had a weekend with no displays or only 2, you'd really panicking about your income because you needed to keep the money trickling in, because that third, the air show income, that was a half of our second revenue, source. So that was very important. But then, of course, we would bump into all the guys, the guy, whoever's flying the Harrier, the Hawk, all the Red Arrow guys. We got to know the Red Arrows pilots so well in the 1980s and early 90s because we were pretty much at all the same events they were at. And then, of course, if you're night stopping, which happened not all the time, but because sometimes you'd fly in display and you'd fly out and you'd do something else and you'd come back the next day having night stop somewhere else. So but you'd bump in and spend a lot of time with these same people and on the same crew buses with a lot of banter, a lot of good humor. And it was really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sure. Now, obviously, knitted into all of this, Nigel, is aerobatics, which I know is a huge passion of yours. Where and when did the competitiveness come out? Because as I said in the introduction, there's an incredible pedigree, Nigel, you have in aerobatic flying. Tell us about when that journey began and how it started.
The first thing I do want to say is that wherever you found out that I had won the British National Unlimited 8 times in a row is true. And it used to say, and I hope it still doesn't, but that I'm the only one to have done that. But I believe Gerald Cooper's done that now. So I'm not the only one. But Neil Williams won it 13 times, but he won 7 in a row. Then he won 6 in a row. So he's the all-time king of being British national champion for sure, no doubt about that. Anyway, my interest in competition aerobatics started while I was flying aeromachis. It sounds bonkers, but I wrote to my uncle in England and I'd seen an advertisement in a flying magazine for Neil Williams's book Aerobatics. So I managed to get a copy. I got my uncle to send me a copy, and it became my little Bible while I was flying jets. I started to try and do things, but there's not much you can do because it's for piston engine airplanes, and I'm a piston guy. In the end, I love piston airplanes far, far more than I do jets because of what you can do with the gyroscopics, the slipstream, and the versatility of high-performance aerobatic airplanes. But I could introduce like a rolling a roll on top of a loop in a jet. People weren't doing that, and I was a student in the Air Force. So, and we were allowed to design any display routine we want, not display, but aerobatic routine we wanted, as long as it was within the capability of the airplane. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And then as soon as I could in the 80s, when I was out and about, I would practice stuff. I would sneak 10 or 15 minutes here and there in a pits estuary practicing rolling circles, having just read Neil Williams's book, which was my Bible. So that's the way I got a good foundation building up to 1986, when we managed to convince Marlborough that I could get into the British aerobatic team for the World Championships to be held at South Cerney in 1986. The fact that I'd never entered an aerobatic competition in my life is something you gloss over when you give your presentation. You have to just you don't have to tell lies, but you don't have to tell you don't have to tell it as it properly is. But anyway. But Philip Meeson just said, one of them picked it up, said, "Philip, you've been British champion 4 times. Nigel, have you entered a competition?" I said, "No." And Philip said, "But never mind, he'll be in the British team." Anyway, so I trained very, very hard for 3 months on an extra 230, working my way from doing rolling circles in an S2A to be able to fly unlimited in an extra 230, and managed to pull it off. So it was pretty fortunate.
Yeah. Now we talked at the beginning about practicing loops. Give us some of the principles, Nigel, of aerobatic flight. Now, without going into a principles of flight lecture, we've got varying levels of experience of our listeners. Everyone has avgas running through their veins. We understand the passion and we know why we like to go up in the air. But talk to us about things like kinetic energy, potential energy, lead and lag, and you talk about gyroscopics. Can you try and knit together in its simplest form the topic of aerobatics in terms of aviation, and what those components are?
I think that's a very, very complex question to try to answer, but I'll try and give it my best and simplest terms as to the way I saw it. I didn't really see it for its complexity in a way. I saw it for its 3-dimensional freedom. I was very much drawn to high performance airplanes where you could move the nose of the airplane and move in any dimension you wanted, whether using any of the controls. I mean, so you could, the fact that you could just slew the nose, because you're not in a jet, so you're not going to have a flame out. You've got the gyroscopic properties, the precessional gyroscopic qualities of the propeller. You've got what the throttle can do in terms of gyroscopic force, in terms of well, you've got to take care of high power, high speed versus low power, low speed, and all what that does with your feet, and just three-dimensional freedom, and then choreographing that for air displays, especially in a team. I love team flying particularly because all of you have got to have a good day for a really good show, and it's not always the same, So and being able to put something on which is pleasing for the people who are watching, and designed just for their pleasure, not for you to try and be clever or whatever. In fact, you've got to just be simple. And then when I finally got into competition aerobatics, I absolutely loved the precision of it and the right and wrong. It's either it is a 10, it's perfect, which I think I might have got one for a loop once, but it's a rare event, and the pursuit of just trying to fly an aeroplane so precisely that a judge on the ground can't see any errors. Elusive, but a great goal, and I loved the journey of doing that. But I would say all about three-dimensional freedom with a machine that's capable of doing that. And once you get to a stage where you're actually strapping the machine onto you, it really is, and you don't think about what you're doing inside the cockpit with all the controls. You're just steering your body in the direction you want it to go, and I think that's just a wonderful, wonderful freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned gyroscopic precession. Just help us understand what that means, and maybe some of the maneuvers that we see at an air show that are the result of that.
Now I'm not a massive guru of all the amazing tumbling that people are doing nowadays, and I got as far as doing knife edge spins and started to introduce that into air display flying, and decided that it was not a great idea from a maintenance of the airplane perspective, with the stresses on the crankshaft and the prop, and also from just altitude loss. And we live in Europe, and very often you're trying to do your display under 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet. So why do a knife edge spin? And all your sort of gyroscopic stuff should really be going uphill. But no, just the challenge of, so I did some of the very basic tumbles which were around in the 1980s, but I certainly wasn't an exponent of them. Where I was referring to gyroscopics is what I love about propeller-driven airplanes is the fact that every change of power, every change of G requires you to use your feet. And it has to be, sometimes depending on the machine, it has to be an unbelievably subtle use of feet, which once I got to air racing, if you in an Edge or an MX2 or an MXS, if your feet aren't very precise and very subtle, you can see it big time in a chicane where you're rolling, you're trying to keep dead level with a measuring stick next to you, because that everybody can see if you go up and down, So getting that kind of thing right when you're using your feet all the time, your speed goes up, you need left rudder, your speed, your slow speed, high power, you need a lot of right rudder with the engines. I love that. I absolutely love it, actually, still do.
Yeah, and I think yes, that feeling of satisfaction of controlling the machine around the sky. You're sort of in charge of your destiny, and then to be up against others who have an equal passion in a competitive environment at the level you were flying at must have just been all-consuming. And I suppose perhaps you may have had not an advantage, but you've been around that environment in your working week as well as at the weekends. And I know. There's Richard Pickin, a good friend of mine. I know he was around in the 90s, I believe, or the 2000s at the sort of national level, running a business, but also trying to do this high-end sport. It must have been very demanding.
One of the things I tried to do was, and I was very fortunate in a way whereby I did a lot of displays and pizzas and stuff, and I flew a lot in the extras too. But when I jumped into the extra 230 or the 300 to go and do competition aerobatics, it was like a change of mindset, because it's a very, very different discipline. It's a totally different thing. It's flown much higher. So all what you're after and all the parameters you set are quite different. And I think very important to to change your mindset and the discipline you have and the objectives you have and what you're trying to do, because you're trying to please an expert in competition aerobatics. Whereas in air shows, the last person you want to impress is the expert. You got to impress the crowd, you know, and you can impress the crowd with unbelievably simple stuff if you present it well. And that's the trick: is smoke and mirrors. Use smoke and mirrors. Keep it simple. And touch wood, I never frightened myself ever in a display. And I think it's by having a very good grounding, I have to say, from Philip Meeson, who told me something simple once, very simple, early 80s. He says, never forget, when you do a loop in a low level in an air show, you do a positive loop, you're half the way around the loop, you're upside down, and you the right way up the other half. One is very much more difficult to do in an air show and much riskier, the outside loop. The crowd's not going to know the difference. The crowd doesn't really know the difference. So, maybe it's not a great idea to do have that kind of thinking where you're trying to do something which is uber clever or much more difficult, because you've got to cater for the day you're not feeling great, or the visibility is terrible, or maybe, whatever. So you've got to just keep it simple and keep it so far from the edge of the limit, the limits of the machine or your capability. You've got to make it, just keep it simple.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Nigel. And if I can just dwell on that, it's probably a good moment to sort of bring in a couple of questions. Now, this question is from me, and you'll know why. But in terms of someone's journey in a display flying career, there's going to be various considerations. There's going to be points in your display flying career where you'll move from one level to the next. What advice would you give someone who's starting off in display flying, in terms of human factors, in terms of aircraft choice, venues, the routine? Where does that journey begin, and what if you could cash in your experience in retrospect, what would you say to yourself maybe all those years ago?
Well, I mean, I was properly lucky. My journey and my grounding and my Air Force career, and I was completely comfortable low level anyway. So flying around in amongst the trees was what we did all the time. So I was lucky with that. And then I think in the 80s, the scenario with the air display environment in the UK was much more diverse and much more vibrant than it is now, because there were so many events. I mean, there really, really were so many events. So how to get into that for someone who wasn't as lucky as me, it's always been a very difficult question to answer. But I would say you've got to start simple. I always encourage people to join the British Aerobatic Association. Although it depends. There's lots of different types of air display flying. There's lots of air display flying you don't need to do aerobatics. Of course, your airplane handling has to be very, very confident, and you need to feel at one with the machine, of course. So you need to do lots of slow speed stuff and in the buffet and be very, very comfortable to fly at low level, no matter what you're actually doing. But if you get into aerobatics, then at least doing a few seasons doing competition aerobatics is a wonderful way to get the discipline to push yourself into new maneuvers. There's lots of different levels from beginners all the way to unlimited, and it's stepping stones and building blocks and discipline. And what am I doing today? I'm not just going to go out and fly in the general area and float about and do the odd loop. No, I've got a mission. I'm going to link this one to this one to this one, and you build and you build and you build, and looking for your break. And of course, we all know that flying is essentially fundamental. The basics of flying are fundamentally so simple. I mean, it's as easy as driving a car. There's lots surrounding flying that's very complicated, but the one thing that's very tough in flying is time and cost. So this person who's striving for to get into airshow flying, I mean, I look at guys like John Romain, Lee Proudfoot. I think of those guys. I mean, we were flying the hot stuff in high performance aerobatic airplanes and stuff. And I think John and Lee were starting up, they were flying around in Piper Cubs, doing a little simple duo, no aerobatics, whatever. Look at them now. Look where they've gone. Look at what John Romain's doing. He's it's a journey. and the journey has to start somewhere simple. And the other piece of advice I always give is, don't go for the expensive machine. Go for a machine which does the job, is cheaper to run, and you can put your money in fuel and time in the airplane, and just get as much time, bum time, seat of the pants time, handling time, slow speed, all that kind of stuff as possible, and then see where that journey takes you. But don't make it complicated too quickly.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, everyone has their happy place, and I wonder if you and I share this in common. My happy place is Duxford. I can't get enough of the place. I know that you have a huge amount of time spent at Duxford. This brings me on to the next chapter in our discussion, Nigel, which of course is your happy years with the old flying machine company. Now, for those of the viewers who don't know what that is, how it was created, give us the background on the old flying machine company.
Well, the old flying machine company was started by Ray Hanna. I'm not sure exactly which year he started it, but it would have been, I would think, in the very early 80s. And so Ray was Ray made the Red Arrows as fame. He's the guy who really got the ball rolling with the Red Arrows becoming what they are today. And his passion for flying and historic fighters, especially Second World War fighters, is legendary. So he started with MH434, and he started trading. He got involved in P51. He got into Duxford. I don't exactly know when. And then, of course, Mark, his son, was a serving Air Force officer, flying predominantly Phantoms. And Mark got into display flying as well with Ray before he left the Air Force, and then left the Air Force to run Old Flying Machine Company, because Ray was actually managing a private jet operation based out of Basel in Switzerland. So Ray would come across, fly some at the weekends and do shows with Mark, but Mark was running Old Flying Machine Company in out of Duxford. But I remember in 1987 at Biggin Hill, Ray sitting on the wing of a Spitfire, of MH434 at Biggin, and I don't know, taxied nearby or walked past or whatever, and he was one of he and Mark were some of the people in the Old Flying Machine people. We met them a lot in the 80s and 90s, like I told you previously. And Ray said, he said, when are you going to come and do some flying for us at Old Flying Machine Company? And oh my God, my heart sang. But I said, Ray, I'd love to, but I'm busy all the weekends. You're busy. I'm busy with this. So the opportunity just didn't arise for me until 1993. So 1993 and 1994, I took a sabbatical in 1994 off the back of Team Toyota Aerobatics. I took the year off in 1994, and that's the time when I started doing displays for Old Flying Machine Company. So by the time Breitling came along, I'd been involved with Mark most of the time, of course, and seeing Ray when he was around, but Mark for several years.
Now, that image that's on our screens now is in my book anyway, one of the high points of the Old Flying Machine Company. Absolutely fantastic. The Breitling Fighters. How did that come about, Nigel? And how was the four-ship put together? Give us some background on how that was created and how it was put together.
Well, it is actually associated with a huge tragedy, which of course was the Mark's accident at the end of 1999. Breitling, Mark signed the Breitling sponsorship deal in 1999, beginning of 1999, which was just before Breitling sent the balloon around the world. I think that was in probably around May of 1999, and then that summer, the Breitling Fighters were all over Europe. And the first year, it was more just a very much more diverse collection of airplanes at different air shows, generally flying singleton, not the box 4 as you see in that picture there. So there was the 109, there was a Fury, there were a few jets, there was the Corsair, those four, plus some jets and a bigger collection. And then very unfortunately, Mark was killed in Sabadell in Spain in the September of 1999. And Ray asked me if I would be able to manage the team and take over from Mark. And what we did was we scaled it down and brought it down mostly to focus on those four aeroplanes. And then just doing a bit of practice to find out how to get four totally different aeroplanes around formation aerobatics, simple formation aerobatics, within their own power bands, drag, and all that sort of stuff. And those four, each of those ones had its own strengths and weaknesses, I can tell you, in a loop.
And that's my first, observation here. I mean, did you put the sort of lowest powered aircraft in the lead because it was the aircraft, or did you put the person in the aircraft? You know, who are your colleagues in the team?
Well,
and what was the thought behind it? You know,
in that picture there, I can tell you that Ray, I led a few times, but very seldom, and only when Ray wasn't there. Because I mean, Ray was one of the few people who was a living legend, I would say, until the time of his death. And he was the leader, and he was properly amazing. He's an amazing guy to be around, amazing person to follow, and to have him be the lead in a display like that was fantastic. So the Kitty Hawk was one of Ray's favorite airplanes. And it was a much better airplane for the lead than any of those other three. Because what Ray did was he would set a constant power and just leave it there. So it was and then, for example, at very high speed, bottom of the loop, Spitfire would have been starting to yelp for power. Mustang would be well throttled back. At the top of the loop, it would be the other way around. The Spitfire would have bags and bags of power. And the P40 would still be on, I think he set something like 35 inches of manifold pressure and 2,500 RPM. That was from memory. And Mustang would be absolutely being heavy and not very efficient at low speed, have a lot of power, Spitfire throttle back, and the Corsair just cruising all the way around. The only problem the Corsair had was on the backside of the loop, making sure that he didn't have an overtake and need to throttle back and have the prop driving the engine. But the Corsair was just a phenomenal airplane to have in the forward position because it had so much power.
Yeah.
So it worked. It worked if you got it right, but it was very easy to get it wrong. And then you just drift off and hope nobody took a photograph at that moment.
Yes. Yeah.
I commend whoever took that picture.
Yeah, it's a cracker. Now, they do say that formation aerobatics is the sport of kings. Tell me, I'm sure you never took anything for granted, Nigel, but what was it like having your mates around you flying those airplanes? You must have had the time of your life.
It was amazing. It was amazing for a multitude of reasons, that being one of them, surrounded by people who, I mean, believe it or not, we honestly never, with the Breitling of those four same pilots, but we had people come in occasionally because Keith Skilling he was an Air New Zealand skipper, and he would get the summer off, which was their winter, and he'd come over here, clever chap, and he would generally be around the whole season. When he wasn't, we had Cliff Spink fly. We had Steve Johnson do a little bit of flying, but mostly Cliff Spink when Keith wasn't around. But just having the kind of the pilots who were flying in Old Flying Machine Company, any one of them, I mean, it was just so easy, very like-minded. Everyone knows their own limitations. Nobody's got an axe to grind or a big ego, wants to prove anything, you know, and everybody's comfortable in the machine, and you keep it simple, just keep it simple, and it works. And we had a great time, great time socially around the air shows, the places we went. And of course, it was such a privilege to be not only with the people, but also with those airplanes. I mean, you take any one of those airplanes anywhere in Europe, and it's a popular sight. Everyone loves to see it. So you don't really have to do much to display them, to be honest, because people just want to see the machine. You don't have to be clever in it as a pilot. You just need to present it nicely, and it does its own talking. And as long as you remember that, it's good all around.
Yeah. Now back to the people. You mentioned Ray and Mark Hanna. Now, being an enthusiast myself, I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed what they did for me as a child and growing up in aviation as I watched them fly at air shows. For those people tuning in who maybe don't know who Ray and Mark Hanna were, can you try and summarize those guys and what they've done for aviation and for you perhaps as well, Nigel?
Oh, they've done a huge amount for me, for sure, but they've done more for aviation. There's no question of that, because I mean, Ray was one of the pioneers in small private collections, and Ray in a Spitfire is synonymous. Doing a low-level display in a Spitfire is synonymous with perfection and remembered more than anyone else. And I have to say, there are very few people that I've flown with and around, actually a handful, who are just so comfortable at extreme low level to a level beyond me, for sure, where they just, and Ray was one of them. He was, his bread and butter was meteors in around Europe in the 60s. He probably, when he learned his craft, so they used to fly really low. So Ray was very comfortable. Yeah. And Mark was I guess Mark was a chip off the old block. Mark was more steeped in jet flying, I think, from the Air Force, but properly into the pistons. And he was just an encyclopedia of knowledge, and what I could never ever match either of them, come even close to their knowledge of the fighters of the time, the people who flew them. I mean, my father was one of them, but these guys knew the history of all the people, the airplanes, their development. It was just phenomenal. So such a privilege to be around them, and masters of their craft.
Yeah. Now, this leads me on to a question that comes from a good friend of mine, actually, in aviation, and it's a brilliant one. You've had, this wonderful relationship with Ray, and of course, we lost Ray too soon. And Biggin Hill, arguably one of the pioneering events that set the standard for air shows across the world. And of course, Ray had his traditional slot. And because of where the sun sets at Biggin Hill, and because the way Jock Maitland would put on the show, that last slot was pretty special. And Nigel, I remember personally being there the year after Ray passed away, and then you took the spot in MH434, I believe. What was that like for you? Just tell us about what it was like to fly at Biggin Hill with that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I dreamt of that display for a long time, actually, before and after, and the privilege of doing it was just amazing. It was amazing in Ray's MH434, which is still operated now by his daughter Sarah, and yeah, I mean, what a place, what a great place to display, and what an amazing privilege to fly that tribute in that airplane. Mm-hmm. One of the highlights of my display flying career, I would say, was that display.
Yeah, and I remember it fondly. And here we have a photograph of MH434 getting up to other business, which looks like to be somewhere on the continent. What's going on here?
That's Yves Rossi, Jetman, and we did that in Switzerland. I mean, I happened to be based doing an air show where he flew out of, and he asked if he could come alongside. So we had a bit of a brief, and I mean, that's just another, that's a whole new ball game, that is. And he's truly amazing man, doing something pretty unique. He's not the only one now, I know, but absolutely a real pioneer and a guy who knew how to get from A to B in a project, step by step, taking it just one at a time, learning along the way, having his fair share of exciting mishaps in terms of having to separate from the early wings before he finally came up with the right wing profile. Amazing guy. Yeah, great fun.
Yeah, I think that sums up that photograph. Great fun, absolutely. Now we can see Breitling written on his wingsuit there. I'd like to spend the last few minutes just talking about the last sort of main chapter of your flying career, Nigel, which was your association with Breitling. As I said at the top of the hour, you know, you've been involved with Breitling for a long time. Tell us the story. Where did it begin?
Well, I was very, very lucky because, of course, my intro was courtesy of Ray and Mark and the old flying machine company. So that was just fortuitous. I was just there. And then when Breitling wanted to move away from the fighters, so we did. It became 5 years. So we did the 1999 and then 2000 up to the end of 2003. But we knew from the beginning of end of 2002 that 2003 was definitely the last year with Breitling, because they were wanting to go into something different. I think they just wanted to change the image away from the Breitling Fighters, and of course we know where that went. They were very interested in the Super Constellation, very interested in the DC-3, of course, and very just amazing people. All of the hierarchy of Breitling were aviators, and so they went the jet team route. And for me, they wanted some input in their with the pit specials and the MX there, which I was racing at that time. We were doing these corporate days for them in Switzerland every year. So, and you can see then they became the Breitling wing walking team as well. And so we used to go to Buox, that's at Buox in Switzerland, and do these events every year for a couple of weeks, which was always a great privilege. And then and we kept doing that all the way through to when Breitling was eventually sold, 2017, I believe. So we were doing that pretty much every year. But then meanwhile, I managed to, starting off with the pit specials and an extra 300 midwing. Along came the air race, and I managed to drag Breitling kicking and screaming in that direction, because it wasn't what they thought where they thought they wanted to go at that time.
Yeah, and well, so that takes me neatly on to the air racing side of things. You know, you can imagine. I can imagine the first meeting, sat down with the CAA. You know, this is what we want to do. You know, can you sign us off, please? Were you involved in some of the? No,
I wasn't. I was busy doing other things. I mean, I was with the old flying machine company. And then one day, a friend of mine, Frank Versteeg from Holland, sent me a video clip, and it was a video from his cockpit of him diving down and flying under the chain bridge in Budapest. And I thought, this is crazy. This is fantastic. This is,
yeah.
I'd love to do that, and flying through this inflated pylon track. And so no, I wasn't one of the earlier ones. I think they started in 2003, and it had been going on a bit and developing, and Steve Jones was involved, Paul Bonham from the UK, and basically the driving force was a guy called Peter Bessignier. He's a Hungarian, and I knew Peter very, very well because we used to compete together. He competed for Hungary when I first started, and then I met him a lot in the Far East, in China. We spent a lot of time together. Absolutely extraordinary aviator, and he'd gone to Red Bull wanting support for flying in this in the Breitling's competition, what do they call, Grand Prix of aerobatics, and they basically said to him, well, actually, do you have any ideas for an event which we could be do ourselves, you know, something Red Bull could do? And he proposed this air racing to them, and then they pioneered it, and I had nothing to do with that, I'm afraid. But I'm very happy they did.
Well, I tell you Nigel,
that's an interesting video of which I used in presentations to show how the bottom screen is what my son used to create on using an Excel spreadsheet and then transferring the data into Google Earth. And he would create the perfect racing line for me before a race. And this was an example of matching what I was trying to do on the bottom screen with what I actually did on the top screen in live. But you can see how accurate the bottom rendering is. Yeah,
that's fantastic. So the bottom screen is the perfection. That's the line you're looking for.
So my son Max, the spreadsheet was I started racing in 2005, half a season, and then 2006 full time. And by 2008, I was beginning to flounder a little bit because I was sort of really in the I was in the doldrums. I'd gone the MX route with an MX aeroplane, and when I didn't do very well, I really didn't know whether it was me or the aeroplane. So I'm really thinking it's me, and I'm trying to work on what I need to do. And I went to James Allison for help. James is very a big boffin in Formula One, and an aviator himself, and he drew up this. I worked with him for him to create this model within a computer program, Excel driven, which would he could then use to do that kind of thing that you saw in the bottom of the screen there. So he helped me for quite a few years. And first of all, it took me down the pathway of flying like a robot, which didn't work because it was like, after this gate at 5 degrees anti-clockwise, if you pull 6.8 G and blah, 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 you're going to gain 0.1 of a second and all this kind of stuff. So, and then I started winging it a bit. And then when the race came back in 2014, luckily I had my son full time because James didn't have time. He was with Ferrari at that time. And he helped Max develop that program. And then I had somebody with me at every race helping me to he would find the best line, and which was scientifically the best line that the airplane could manage. I would rehearse that, memorize it, and then try and replicate it on the track. And that was my progress to coming out of the doldrums and doing well.
What a story! That really is fantastic, and you can see you there. What was what was it like on the day, Nigel, in the cockpit? I mean, you talked about how, because of the preparation, because of the level of competence required in display flying, actually, the display flying itself is repetitive and boring. It's, you're exciting the crowd, but actually in the cockpit, you're, in complete control. Would you draw any comparisons to your Red Bull racing with display flying in terms of, the cognitive side of things and the way that you were sort of having to behave as a Formula One driver, but also match up the, other elements that aviation brings into the mix?
Well, I think the main thing to say is two things. First of all, instead of people painting a picture for people, you're trying to beat a clock, and then which is a whole new ball game. And then the other thing, which is totally different, is competition. So with competition, fierce competition, comes the need for amazing discipline. So you need to have such a very strong understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve, how easily you can get sucked into a trap, and how important it is to always be able to see that big picture, always be able to bail out. And a lot of people, I think, who look from afar at airshow flying probably don't fully realize that, unlike Formula One or wheeled flying, the sky above you is the biggest. I mean, it's better than a sand trap in Formula One. I mean, it's just a huge, vast space of safety. So the moment you can, as long as you program yourself that whatever happens, if you don't like what's in front of you, even up to the last millisecond, you can just twitch your wrist, pull, and bail out. You shouldn't really get into any trouble. I never did. I hit pylons, and I pulled out of the track sometimes, but I never scared myself at all. So it's a matter of knowing your limitations, the airplane's limitations, what you're trying to do. You're not trying to, if you don't win, it's not the end of the world. It sometimes feels a bit that way, for a bit, until you have your first drink in the pub to drown your sorrows on a Sunday night, but because the lows are more frequent than the highs, and you get used to that. Well, you kind of don't, but you have to live with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really fascinating insight, and Nigel, this brings me to just the very last chapter here, and it's a simple question: what are you doing now? Because you said earlier that you've retired from professional flying. I mean, is there any, what are you doing? I mean, can anything match what you've done for the last 40 years?
I like, at some point, I'll tell you why I stopped. I really, really wanted to stop while I was on top of my game in air racing, and I knew I couldn't do it forever. And of course, there are younger people coming on, and I had won the world championship, thank goodness. So that was great. I absolutely loved the man-machine clock thing. I mean, I just loved it. It was absolutely amazing, flying the most incredible, extraordinary airplane, surrounded by a team of incredible people, and a sport that's just was phenomenal. We raced in the middle of New York, in the middle of Budapest, London, Istanbul. I mean, how can you ask for anything more? It was amazing. But I didn't want ever to open the hotel curtains somewhere in the world on a really windy day when that track can be very hostile, and even think, I hope they cancel flying today. I never wanted that thought ever to cross my mind. So I was determined to stop before I felt that someone was going to stop me, or circumstances, or whatever. So that's why I stopped. Do I miss it? Yeah, I miss it. I miss it a lot. But you have to stop sometime. I've been extraordinarily lucky with my career, and I won't stop flying until I'm either medically unfit or I don't have access to an aeroplane or something. So I've got an RV7 now, which I absolutely love flying. I deliberately got a side-by-side aeroplane so I could take people flying, for charity rides and stuff like that, and just children, young people, side by side. I love doing that. I have access to one of our Pizzas I sold back to Philip Neeson, and he asks me to look after it. So I fly that. So I'm around. I'm not doing that much flying, but I love what I do. And I'm just very busy. I can't imagine being bored. I've got lots of projects to work on, play a bit of golf. I'm busy. And I do enjoy it, but I miss the cut and thrust of competition flying a lot.
Yeah, I can understand that. Now, key question: where's the book? Is there one?
Oh my goodness! Oh, if I just had £1 for everybody who's asked for that question, I could have donated loads to charity. But I think there is a book in me. There is a book, and I've sometimes kind of started it in my mind a little bit, what I would write about. I know what I would do. I'd make it anecdotal. I'd just tell stories. But the problem is, very time consuming. I would have to be motivated to do it for myself and my family, because I just don't really think that many people will be interested. When I look at around aviation, there are so many people who've done so many things far more interesting and innovative than I've done. I've just been a lucky guy going down a journey which somebody else has traveled. You know what I mean? In a way, not exactly the same journey, but doing things that other people are doing. And there are people out there who are doing pioneering, cutting edge stuff. They're the ones who should write a book. I think my book would be quite interesting for very few people. That's the truth.
Well, that's a very humble thing for you to say, Nigel, and it's modest of you. But I do beg to differ. If you look at the scale of aviation in this country, if you think about the industry and you think about those who are within it, and a good publisher with someone who can market that title, let's pick this up again. I'll think of a title for you. Then you're going to have to do it.
I did have somebody contact me and offer to write a book for me. And I've got it. I've got the address somewhere. I don't know. I was anyway. But thank you very much. Very kind words, John. You're very kind.
I'm not gonna force the issue, but you heard it here, folks. Nigel's thinking about it. So look, we're drawing to an end. I've got some questions here, and I really must get these out on air. So now, my goodness me, this is a hard one. Okay, this question is, what is your best display? Now, don't know where this person's coming from. What was the best for you because it was perfect? Maybe it was the venue, maybe it was the airplane, but you know, what was the most magical moment for you, Nigel, in your display flying career? How about we say that instead?
I think my most magical moment in my display flying career was in Spielberg in 2014 when I actually won the world championship. And 10 seconds before that, I thought I'd lost it, and then suddenly I'd won it. So, and the elation and the, oh my goodness, and the release of the monkey off the back was huge, and that was so special, that whole thing. But my air show time has been just littered with the most amazing journey of wonderful experiences. My display at Biggin Hill, the tribute to Ray, absolutely is right up there at the top, I would say, air display wise. But then my journey with the Golden Dreams team and the Toyota and Marlboro teams in the UK with a bunch of people, because for me what was the most special was sharing that with people, working in a team, and where when you get it together. We had one amazing time with Steve Privet, Lee Proudfoot, Steve Johnson, all these guys, Dick Manning, Ian Peacock, from an old friend of mine from the Rhodesian Air Force, all over Europe, all over the Far East, having a journey together in a team, creating magic for people. Has been, there've been very few downs on that score. My downs in flying have been when you do badly at the air race. It's not a great feeling. You hit the pylon that wasn't even the hard one to hit, and you're out of the race. That's the end of your weekend. That's not fun. But I've lots and lots of highs.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. I'm getting a bit of
thank you, Rachel Broxton, for asking me to do a book.
Yes. Yeah. See, look, already the pressure's mounting. Can you see? See what I've done there?
Maybe one day.
Okay. Here's the next question. We kind of touched on this earlier, but maybe not so much. The question is, how did you in your display flying, how did you separate commercial pressures with the human elements of flying the display? So I guess that's a question around having to make it to the venue because the weather's bad, or having to feel.
Brilliant question. Obey the hairs on the back of your neck, and always have a bailout. Always have another option. So when the hairs, for me, the biggest, the least, or the biggest risk I reckon we always had in air race, in a way, and in air displays, is crossing Europe in lousy weather. If you're not careful, your options are going to run out. Daylight, fuel, weather, whatever. Always make a plan. Go early, and just at the back of your mind, be able to say no. If the hairs start standing on the back of your neck, and you think, you know what, I'd rather be on the ground having a cup of tea, go and get a cup of tea now. Make a plan, turn around, get a cup of tea, survive, have a think, wait for the weather to pass, sleep the night, miss the show, whatever. Always be prepared to miss the show. But actually, you should never miss the show, because you should go earlier. But that's if you're a professional. If you're not a professional and you've got deadlines and other commitments, then you just really have to know when to say, no, this is beyond my limits, or I'm not comfortable, and just stop. Just listen to the hairs on the back of your neck, and you stay out of trouble. It kept me out of trouble.
Great advice, Nigel. Okay. Back to your aerobatic flying. This is probably a terminology thing as much as anything. What is unlimited freestyle aerobatics?
Okay. Unlimited level of aerobatics is where the pilot and the machine should be able to do everything. So it's like there's a catalog for competition flight, for what used to be called a resty, but it's now something else. But it's very the technical side. There's a catalog, and at unlimited level, the airplane will be equally capable, inverted and erect. The wing's going to be symmetrical. It's going to have huge power, huge roll rate. You should be able to do everything that you can do left. You should be able to do to the right, inside, outside, flick rolls, blah blah, everything. sliding back, whatever. You should be able to do that. And then when it comes to unlimited freestyle, the rules are just different, but you need the same machine. And then you're starting to do tumbling and stuff that's just creative, and you're painting a picture for the judges. And that's unlimited freestyle. So you're freestyling it with the capabilities to fly unlimited aerobatics in an unlimited machine.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Interesting. Okay. Last question, and this is my one. As you know, Aerobility is made up of like-minded people who share our passion. But through circumstance or other situations, the deck of cards haven't fallen quite perfectly. If there's anyone considering taking up a career in flying or something to do with aviation, but has a doubt, but yet the flame is in there, what advice would you give, Nigel?
That's a complex, difficult question, and I think it's so easy to just flippantly say, follow your dreams and all that kind of stuff. But I think the most important thing is to know that many things on the inside are a lot easier than you think when you get your foot through the door. When you get involved in something, and flying is not complicated, and the pathways sometimes are there, but your capability, don't disbelieve your own capability. And I think a lot of people, the people who truly are passionate and really want to fly, will normally find some kind of pathway towards where they want to go. Sometimes it doesn't always work out. Sometimes you don't get the luck. Somebody else gets luck, whatever. But always believe, just believe. I think that's the main thing to say, because the opportunities are more difficult than the reality once you've had the opportunity, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting to hear. Well, look, that brings us to 1 hour 20 minutes, probably one of the longest Inspirability talks we've had, for good reason. And I'm going to end it on a rhetorical question, so you don't have to answer it. But I think you're a very humble chap, and there's an incredible career you have behind you. I'm looking forward to the book. But my rhetorical question is, how many people have you inspired into aviation? Whether that's a display in the Breitling Fighters, whether that's a display in the Marlborough team, who knows? Someone might be flying their 747 somewhere because they saw you at an air show, Nigel. I know you inspired me. I'm a Biggin Hill boy, and the memories of MH434 and all of those wonderful years will sit with me for a very long time. But it's been so enjoyable, just hearing your diverse career, from flying Vampire jets and Alouette 3s and Pizzes and Spitfires. It's just wonderful to hear. So on behalf of everybody at Aerobility and those that will listen to this chat in perpetuity, thank you very much, Nigel, for giving your time this evening. And I hope that we'll get to meet you in the flesh sometime very soon. So thank you very much for giving your time.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure. And I'll see you down at Blackbush sometime.
Look forward to it. Thanks very much. Cheers, Nigel.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.
Well, there we have it. What a great evening. I really enjoyed that. And there you go. There's some really good advice there for anybody wanting to go into aviation and maybe, take themselves beyond just a Cherokee. Who knows? You might be able to learn about how to make a career of it in Nigel's book. I'm going to keep pushing it. Okay, right. So the next big event for Aerobility is the Aviators Ball. That takes place on the 20th of November. I look forward to seeing those of you who have a ticket. We're sold out. There's 500 people coming along to the event. We'll be joined by the Blades, the Red Arrows, and many familiar faces. So that's really our social highlight of the year, and it's our opportunity to raise lots of funds for our wonderful charity. So I will see you all then. We will be continuing the Inspirability talks. We have more great guests lined up over the winter months, so stay tuned on social media. But for now, Enjoy your Wednesday evening, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.